y'all, Dixie here. Today I want to tell you why I think the Arizona Trail is better suited for more experienced thru hikers and not the best starting point for beginners. So let's go ahead and jump on in, because that's what's going to happen to you on day one of the Arizona Trail. You're going to have to jump on in, at least if you're going northbound. Straight out of the gate, there is a really big climb. You go from 5,000 some odd feet at the US-Mexico border to over 9,000 feet at the top of the first climb. The highest point on the trail is just over 9,000 feet and is pretty close to the same elevation that you top out at. And I say at the end of the first day, like I mentioned in my AZT video of my first day, I had a horrible headache and decided to stop before I even made it to the top of the climb that day. So not only are you just throwing yourself into some pretty tough terrain, but also you're going to a significantly high elevation. And if you're somebody who typically lives around sea level like me, that can create its own set of problems. Also, there's a long distance to your first water source, which is Bathtub Spring. It's a pretty cool water source and you can see some wildlife around there. I saw some birds and things like that poking around, but it's actually mile 8 of the AZT, but it's a little tricky because for the AZT to get to the southern terminus, you have to actually start at Montezuma Pass, which is like mile 1.8, and then go down to the border and then backtrack uphill that 1.8 miles back to the pass. So you have to hike 9.8 miles, actual hiked miles, to get to mile 8 of the AZT where the first water source is. Now, on this trail, you do have to get used to longer water carries, but that's just kind of rough for somebody just starting out of the gate. The first day of a thru hike is always tough, unless you've just like really trained super hard, because you can't really train for walking all day, every day with a heavy pack on your back, except to get out there and do it. So a beginner hiker is not necessarily going to know how much water they drink per mile typically. They might overpack gear, so their pack is heavier than it would have to be if they were more experienced. And there are just several reasons why I feel like this is not setting yourself up for the best success through hiking, having a first day like this compared to another trail that might be a little more gentle with you on the first day. Another reason is the resupply points are kind of spread out pretty far. I think it's a better idea to start with a trail that has closer resupply points. That way you're not forced to have to do a lot of miles in between resupply points. The last thing you want to do is be kind of stranded in the middle of a stretch with not enough food, or you didn't prepare properly. So having a trail where you can do less miles starting out, especially if you're not super confident in knowing how many miles you can do in a day, starting off the couch or starting from home, even if you have trained for it. Next, the bailout points on the AZT or hitchhiking points aren't necessarily well trafficked, especially compared to other thru hikes that I've done. I was fortunate enough to have my mom out there helping me along the way, but there were times where I thought, man, if I had to hitchhike from this point, I might be sitting here for a little while, or I might have to arrange for some kind of transportation with a trail angel. And so I just think that there are other trails that might be more thru hike friendly as far as getting to resupply points, and at least having more traffic and a community surrounding the potential hitchhiking points that more folks know what you're doing. Next, on this thru hike, you are starting out in the desert, and for most of the hike it is desertous conditions, so very exposed. I just feel like for a beginner, doing a thru hike that is more forested offers a little bit more protection from the elements, and especially from the sun if you didn't prepare properly for backpacking in the sun. Next, regardless of which direction you decide to hike the Arizona Trail, going Nobo or northbound or Sobo southbound, you are going to deal with some potential time constraints. Going northbound, the time constraint that you have to worry about is the heat for the trail that's at the lower elevation, so basically before you get up to the Mogollon Rim, and then also in the Grand Canyon even after you get up on the rim. The heat can become very unbearable at lower elevations, and then obviously the Grand Canyon, you get down to a low elevation inside the canyon, and then it kind of acts as like an oven. So it's just like baking hot in there. It's, I guess, how a pizza feels in a brick oven. So obviously you want to get through those areas quickly enough that you're not risking your life in the heat. But also, if you start way too early, then in a normal precipitation year, you would have to worry about snow in the southern areas. So it's just like a balancing act, not starting too soon to where you're in danger in too much snowpack, and also not starting too late to where you're in danger in the heat. Now, as long as you can get to that rim before things really start to heat up like I did, then the canyon can be managed. If you start early in the morning and you make sure that you get a campsite reserved at Bright Angel and also at Cottonwood, then you essentially have 3 days of hiking in the canyon, 7 miles per day. And so starting early in the morning allows you to be done hiking before the heat of the day. And then you find some shade and or a water source to hang out in the rest of the day. So even though the temperatures in the canyon were like 110 when I was there, it was bearable the way that I did things, stopping at Bright Angel and hanging out in the creek at the campground. And then the second day, stopping a mile short of Cottonwood Camp at Ribbon Falls and just hanging out there for the day until things cooled off in the evening, and then we hiked that last mile to Cottonwood. And then the final day, of course, we got up in the dark and started hiking out the North Rim. If you're a beginner and you're set on doing the Arizona Trail, it might be best to consider a southbound hike, because the terrain starting out in the northern section is so much more cruisy and enjoyable than the southern areas. It's brutal down south. Like, you look at the elevation profile and it's like, oh, that doesn't look that bad. But then when you're in it, it's rough. It's just rocky, slow going. But up north, it's really nice, cruisy. You're in more coverage with trees, and really the only thing that's a tough climb in that northern portion is coming out of the Grand Canyon on the south rim. So starting up in the north and heading south gives you time to at least get used to a heavy pack on your back. You know, let your legs build up to carrying a pack before you start throwing in these crazy climbs on top of it. There are longer water carries up north, so that is something to think about and consider, but I still think overall it would be better off up there. And there are a lot more bailout points and trailheads that seem to be more well trafficked up that way from what I recall. I will say that for Sobos doing the Grand Canyon, I would still do it the way that I did it, where you stay at Cottonwood and again at Bright Angel and then climb out the south rim. That way you're not putting so much pressure on yourself to, you know, if you stay at Cottonwood, hike 7 miles across the bottom of the canyon and then 7 out in the same day. Even though you won't have the same heat issues, that's just a whole lot on somebody that's been hiking mainly in flatlands. So split it up, give yourself more time to explore and enjoy the canyon anyway. I just think that's the best way to do the canyon, regardless of what time of year you do it. Soak it in and enjoy it while you're there. I should note this year it is not going to be possible to do a Sobo hike in fall of 2025 because of the closures at the North Rim with the fires and everything going on there. I don't know when that will be reopened. Hopefully by next year, people can thru hike those areas again, but that's the way I would do it if I was doing a Sobo hike. Okay, so if I'm like the AZT is not the way to go if you're a beginner, then what are some trails that I've done that I think would be a good starting point for beginners? Well, the AT. Now, there may be some people laughing because the AT is brutal physically. I will give you that hands down. But as far as water is so plentiful along the AT. I think the longest stretch I went for a water carry was like 10 miles. And that was super rare in New York because it was very dry in that area for some reason. So there's just water everywhere. You don't have to carry a lot. So if you end up carrying a lot of extra gear because you're still figuring things out, at least you're not also doing long water carries. It's got a green tunnel, you're more covered from the elements. And then there are just so many people out there. There are people, trail angels all around willing to help you if you have troubles, you need to bail out. There are highly trafficked points where you can do so. And I'm not saying that the AZT does not have an amazing trail angel system. Honestly, the AZT, in my opinion, is only doable because there are amazing trail angels out there that stock caches and help out hikers when they're in a pinch and all of that. But the AT, I think, in many ways is a better beginner trail than the AZT. And while on the AT, like I said, it is physically brutal because it's climbing and dropping and climbing and dropping. You're not going to those high elevations that cause like altitude sickness. Also, the Florida Trail. It's about 1,100 miles. There are many town stops. There are a lot of road walks. So while those sections are exposed, you're either on road walks or in the swamp. And in the swamp, you've got green tunnel coverage. The terrain on the Florida Trail is absolutely flat. Now, it's not necessarily always easy to walk in a swamp, but you do have a lot of water, a lot of bailout points, and again, for a beginner, I think this is a better idea. So the Arizona Trail is 800 miles. Is there something shorter than like the 2,000 mile AT or the 1,100 mile Florida Trail that I think might be a good starting point for beginners? Yes, the Pinhoti Trail. It's 350 miles. It goes through Alabama and Georgia. All of the same stuff, green tunnel, more water, still challenging in the way of terrain, but not crazy high elevations. And there's the Colorado Trail, which is close to 500 miles. Now, to be fair, I have not done all of the Colorado Trail, but I've done the Continental Divide Trail, which some of it overlaps with the Colorado Trail through Colorado, but I've done enough hiking and backpacking in Colorado to have a pretty good feel for that state. You're going to have more water there. There will be some more forested areas. You do still have a threat there of, well, probably potentially more of a threat there with lightning and storms and things, which is a little scary, but still more well-trafficked, more bailout points, shorter water carries. You do have high elevations there that will cause altitude sickness. But again, you don't have like all of these things all in one, like on the AZT. Now, with all of this said, I'm not trying to poo-poo on the AZT or say that you definitely shouldn't do it or that no beginners ever go out there. I actually met a handful of folks who were out there on the AZT as their first thru hike. And then it was like either it was somebody's very first thru hike or a lot of the folks were triple crowners. And somebody made the joke that the AZT is where triple crowners come to die. So it was just funny to see that stark difference. And I don't know how those people who were doing their first thru hike fared out. And so if you're somebody who your first thru hike was the AZT and you've also done some other thru hikes, I'd love to hear your opinion on that. And even if you hadn't done other thru hikes, but I was talking to some of the other triple crowners out there who were like, this would be a really tough trail for a first thru hike. So I feel like a lot of us kind of shared that same opinion. It was a tougher trail than what we were anticipating. And that doesn't mean that it's not doable, but I would certainly say that it's something that you need to prepare for. You need to know the challenges and be ready for them, expect them, and, you know, really kind of look at some of the different bailout points or have some trail angels numbers, you know, that you could call if you get in a pinch, and maybe establish yourself with them before you head out for the different sections or whatever. But I just wanted to put that out there because that was something I consistently thought while I was on the AZT is like, man, this would be a tough trail to do as a first thru hike. So anyway, I hope this video is useful to somebody. If y'all have any other questions, comments about this topic, I would love to hear those in the comments below. Thank y'all so much for watching, and we will see y'all next time.